What's good, folks? It's that time of the year again where we go over all the frames and see where they stand after the buffs and reworks. However, tier lists are usually used as validation for people to see whether the frame they're playing is good. Let me tell you that it doesn't matter. Play what you find fun. At the end of the day, it's a video game. You're here to have fun, but that doesn't change the fact that your frame is bad. People use the fact that they've done level cap with a frame to determine that that frame is good. Warframe is an easy game. You can do level cap with any frame. So again, just play the game the way you want, but your frame is bad. Warframe is a game where you have freedom in building and playstyle, although casual players will usually look for the best setups when looking up guides, so they don't waste their time, because guides like these are for casuals. If you're a hardcore player and have the time, you'll do your own research to find what's good for you in every situation. So this is why I'm making this video more concise, easy to consume and digest without adding nonsense. And that's why each frame will have two rankings based off their normal kit and Helminth version, as Helminth has dominated every single build and power creep is way over the top at this point. And sometimes frames are better with augments than their base kit, because those augments are band-aid fixes. I'll be going in alphabetical order, ranking them based on what they do, how versatile they are, and how well they adapt and improve with different setups. End the video off with a summary and a final thoughts segment. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting off with our boy Ash. This frame is an endurance frame that is mostly known as a weapon platformer, shining in high-level content and has some interesting synergies with weapons, and takes our first slot in the B tier. And using damage amping Helminth to enhance his weapon platform builds still keeps him in B tier, because there are just way stronger frames that do it better. Atlas, the One Punch Man Warframe. All he does is punch things really hard, and every single build you see is about punching things hard, because he can't do anything else. He does have an augment that synergizes with melee influence to change his punching to a chucking large boulders at people for electric kabloomies. Otherwise, nothing else, as his other abilities are just so bad. But he is a tanky boy. People cope with his third ability augment for bonus loot, but it requires 400% strength to even be viable, and that is not worth it, as it requires so much setup while other frames can do it with one button and are more consistent. He is our first C tier Warframe, and with Helminth, still a C tier Warframe. Moving over to Banshee, pretty much known as a solo leveling weapons bot at this point, thanks to the combo of Silence and Gloom, but you can do that with Sevagoth as well. She can do other things like hunting liches, but any other frame can do that, and better. She is supposed to be a weapon platform frame. Her second ability would be better if you can debuff consistently, because having Roar on any weapon platform frame will completely outperform her. And her only survivability tool is Silence, another C tier ranking, with and without Helminth. BARUUK, another punching frame like Atlas, but has a bit more variation with his builds. He does a lot of damage, and if you're going for a punchy build, he has to be built a specific way to keep his restraint meter low, because you have to go negative duration, and this kills any possible setup to include a damage buffing Helminth, so he is limited to a few grouping tools. His first ability completely contradicts the rest of his abilities, as you need to not attack to survive and erode your restraint, and this frame sucks in groups, as he is a solo frame through and through. B tier with and without Helminth. CALIBAN, a frame that recently received a glow up to where he is actually decent. Usually ranked in the doo-doo water tier, he now climbed up to where he can actually be useful in teams and in solo play, and can be built in several ways. He has great survivability, debuffs, crowd control, armor strip, he can summon his boys to help him out that synergizes with his attacks. All of this is without augments and Helminth. He can be played in different setups and even decent weapon platformer. He plays a bit better, but still a bit clunky at certain parts. B tier at base, but A tier with Helminth. CHROMA, How the Mighty Have Fallen. He was once the best weapon platformer in the game, as Helminth was not a thing, and he did it in such a good way. Millions of damage, Eidolon hunting, Profit Taker, you name it. However, his kit is just so outdated, even with the recent buff. You only ever use him for 2 abilities, and those 2 abilities are still very clunky. If you want to farm insane amounts of credits, you take him, pop his 4th ability at the end of Profit Taker. D tier Warframe. C tier with Helminth and buggy synergies. CITRINE, a decent support that gives a damage reduction, healing over time, and energy for herself and teammates. That is also an interesting weapon platformer, able to apply multiple status effects, improve status chance and duration on herself and allies' weapons. She fits in a lot of situations, making her quite versatile. A tier Warframe, but still A tier with Helminth. Site09, our newest frame as of the release of this video. An amazing weapon platformer, can have infinite ammo, has access to every type of elemental damage buff available through modding. Weak point damage scaling, insane punch through, ricocheting projectiles, and infinite invisibility if you can land headshot kills. Synergizes with a lot of weapons, unfortunately not incarnates, and nukes with his exalted sniper. Unfortunately, he is horrible in team scenarios, and that's if you play him with his exalted. And unfortunately, if you cannot land headshots, he's going to feel really bad. So if you're going to play him in a team, it'll be better to replace his 4th ability for other buffs. B tier Warframe at best, A tier if he's playing solo, and with or without Helminth. DAGATH, pretty much a 2-build frame. Nuke with her 4 or build her as a weapon platform. She has decent survivability with her 3rd, has access to nice damage debuff spread that enhances your overall damage with abilities and weapons, as she's able to easily debuff enemies with the viral status effect. She's decent in both group and solo play, but doesn't excel in anything that can be done better with other frames. Her biggest weakness when nuking with her 4th ability is stairs. Her ability sucks with slight bumps in the terrain. It can only go forward. So if your enemies are slightly elevated or slightly below you, they're not going to take any damage. B tier Warframe, both at base and Helminth. El Dantissimo, the frame that has gone through a lot in such a short time. A controversial release, moving back and forth between buffs and nerfs, the community complaining. Oh, it was a good time. He has one of the best survivability tools in the game, easily applying and reapplying overguard for himself and teammates. So if you die with a Dante, you blame the Dante. It's not your fault. Guys, it's not your fault. You're not bad at the game. It's the Dante's fault. Debuffing enemies to take more damage, AoE nuking capabilities. Unfortunately, his birds have really bad AI. They need to buff that. He can pretty much do it all on his own. A tier frame at base, S tier with Helminth. EMBER, another Warframe that has fallen from grace. Pretty much mediocre in everything she does. She needs too many augments to feel barely useful. Even with some quality of life changes, she still feels underwhelming in so many situations. She plays okay as a weapon platformer, but other frames can do a better job. C tier Warframe. EQUINOX, a frame with a bloated kit that doesn't have great scaling unless you apply Helminth. She is decent at map-wide nuking and an okay support, but still pales in comparison to better Warframes that do her job better. She can function as a weapon platformer, but only for guns, giving them base damage. She's also somewhat of a speed frame. She can buff teammates with bonus strength, slow down enemies, and have them take a bit more damage, put them to sleep, but still very clunky with an outdated kit. C tier Warframe. EXCALIBUR, the poster boy of Warframe and a starter Warframe. He's just an okay frame. Nothing broken, nothing over the top. He can do decent amount of damage, but knows his lane. Really good with melee synergies, amplifying them to deal insane amounts of damage. So if you like swinging with melees and swords, he's your guy. His Umbra form is still very buggy. You're better off using the regular Excalibur or Prime. What's funny is that DE released an augment to disable his sentience, so they don't have to fix the bug related to sentience. 10 out of 10, B tier frame through and through. Frost, my boy, the frame that was down in the gutter, but gotten some significant buffs and quality of life changes around his kit and his main element. Everything about him was very badly designed and clunky and severely outdated. Now, with all the changes, makes him a dominant force on the field. Armor strip, crowd control, true damage nuking, weapon platforming, defense and survivability, supporting himself and teammates. The Ice King, A tier Warframe. GARA, a frame that is great at nuking maps, but really only has 3 types of ways to play her. Build to nuke with her first ability, build to nuke with her fourth ability, or stack damage on her 2 and run around through enemies to nuke them. No issues with energy and can support her teammates with energy if needed. She has great survivability, but not a very versatile frame. Building to stack up damage on her 2 takes ages, and if you fall off the map or get nullified, you'd lose everything and have to do it all over again. B tier frame. GARUDA, the Berserker. She can easily sustain herself with healing and energy, has her own damage buff that stacks up by killing enemies, and can be used alongside other damage buffs. She's able to debuff enemies and have them bleed, can nuke an entire area full of enemies, an overall good frame, and is all about high risk, high reward. And people don't like that, as you need to damage yourself to gain energy. She has her own unique melee weapon when you unequip your melee, that has decent stats if you want to bleed enemies to death. An A tier Warframe. GAUSS, aka Johnny Sins, one of the most versatile Warframes in the game. Nuking, tanking, speed, amazing weapon utility, the only frame in the game currently that buffs his own casting speed, the epitome of not letting animations shine, peak performance. If you stand still with this frame, you're hurting him. He has to keep moving, building up kinetic energy to fuel his entire kit. So the more you move, the more damage he deals, and the more he's able to sustain himself. Our first S tier Warframe. GRENDEL, Gus's best friend. Unfortunately, GRENDEL suffers from being anything but good. He did get a glow up, however, playing him in a group or solo just feels really bad, and it's all because of his first ability. You need to consume enemies to use 2 of his main useful abilities. Nourish is his helmet, and it's just better on any other Warframe than himself. And on GRENDEL himself requires you to eat enemies to actually use it. The Warframe that ability came from is in its nerfed state, and he's horrible at maintaining his resource and ammunition, because whenever he eats enemies, they digest too quickly, and this is especially bad in lower levels. C tier frame through and through. GYRE, amazing design of a Warframe. I love electric powers, but unfortunately, she is nothing without her augments and helmets. She's about damaging enemies, doesn't have the greatest utility tools, her energy regen is still very mediocre, her grouping ability has bad physics and is quite clunky, and it has horrible line of sight. She also has very long animations and requires a lot, and I mean a lot of investment to make her work. C tier frame at base, B tier with a lot of investment, meaning helmets, Archon shards, the whole shebang. HARROW, another priest you can't rely on. A support that hates to be in a group and supporting other teammates. He shines so hard in solo play. He has amazing survivability with shield and health regen, decent crowd control, weapon damage, and utility buffs for weapons. And of course, infinite supply of energy. And to perform all of these feats, he needs to do all of the work by himself. So he needs to do the killing to provide the energy and healing. So his teammates need to sit back. He does have augments that allow his teammates to gain the benefits of his support abilities. They still need to be around the same area and have him prime the enemies so they can actually do something about it. So for him to be a decent support in groups, just slap on Nourish and press 4 here and there. A tier frame if he isn't a support for his teammates. B tier if he's with a team. HILDRYN, the Shield Maiden. Her entire kit revolves around shields, using them to damage, support, and debuff enemies. Her best ability is Pillage, and it's also a helmet that anyone else can use. Her kit is still very clunky. She got a few quality of life updates, but still a mediocre in terms of versatility, because whatever she can do, others can do 1,000 times better. C tier Warframe. HYDROID. This frame was one of the worst Warframes in the game, but got a massive glow up. He has great nuking and priming capabilities with his first ability, loot frame with his fourth, status immunity, grouping, crowd control, movement tool, iframes, priming, and partial armor strip with only his second ability. His sword ability is really great as it grants you armor and corrosive damage, but is clunky because of the annoying snapshotting issue that removes your bigger buff that makes it unreliable sometimes. And his passive allows corrosive procs to fully strip at 10 stacks, A tier frame through and through. He would be S tier if it wasn't for his clunky 3rd and 4th ability. INAROS, the Sand King. There is a lot of history with this frame. From one of the most useless pieces of garbage, worse than HYDROID, to now a somewhat decent frame. He had useless abilities and a worthless passive. He's now got okay survivability for Steel Path, status immunity, decent crowd control, and an interesting damage ability using the 2nd ability augment. He's now okay, but got a few issues. C tier frame. IVARA. Clunky and outdated stealth frame. She feels a lot better solo and in an endurance setting. Similar to Ashe, she is mostly a weapon platformer, but has already been power crept insanely hard by Site-09. She's literally a worse version of Site-09. You need to walk slow or invest into a weird setup to just walk faster while invisible. C tier frame. Jade, bloated kit, but could be useful in niche scenarios. Unfortunately, she has a one-dimensional type of gameplay. Very mediocre to what she can do, as others just do it better. She's pretty much a flying EQUINOX with built-in armor strip. C tier. KHORA. How do I make this as short as possible? Millions of damage, AoE nuking, able to use 2 companions, benefiting from 2 types of companion synergies, mass crowd control, the best and the most consistent loot frame in the game. S tier frame. KOUMEI. Her entire kit is about promoting gambling, and what she can do can easily be done by an arcane, and outperformed by pretty much any Warframe with a basic build. Her best ability is also her worst ability, a gimmick frame that has no reason being in Warframe. If she didn't have the horrible gambling mechanic, better hitboxes with her first ability, and able to trigger specific damage types, better passive, TLDR, if she was a completely different frame, she would deserve a decent rank. She's D tier with a helmet and a turret, trash tier with her base kit. KULLERVO. Melee red crits allow you to hit billions of damage. That's also his helmet that anyone else can have. AoE nuking with guns and melee thanks to his 3rd ability, easy combo build-up, and basic survivability with his 2nd. A tier frame if solo, and with a helmet, B tier with his base kit. LAVOS became a very good weapon platformer, all because of his augment, Valence Formation. Other than that, he is clunky, slow, need to have a rotation to get his abilities off cooldown, and outperformed by a lot of frames, or just an AoE weapon. D tier frame with his base kit, B tier as a weapon platformer using Roar and Valence Formation. LIMBO. Outdated and clunky. Good idea for a frame, but poorly executed, and you can totally tell how badly he has aged as a Warframe. His main use now is Riven Challenges, Lua Spy, and Exterminate Capture Quick Resource Farm. But he's already been put out of that job because of Zaku. D tier frame. LOKI. Outdated frame, nothing interesting. His whole kit is carried by arcanes, helmet, and bugs. And there's a Warframe that does his first 3 abilities with only one of her abilities. D tier frame. Mag. Amazing weapon platformer, debuff, armor strip, crazy damage, damage concentration, damage amp, crowd control, interesting weapon synergies, and she can also replenish shields for herself and teammates. And all of this in a starter Warframe. A tier frame. MESA. One of the best frames for anyone who hates aiming and wants a one-button kill build. Unfortunately, that's all she does. She has great survivability, decent crowd control, and does a lot of raw damage with her exalted weapon. She fits in pretty well in many situations. She does have a niche weapon platform build, however, not the best or reliable one. B tier frame at best, A tier with helmets. MIRAGE. One of the top weapon platformers, literal absolute damage frame. She can also nuke with her abilities, and with the recent quality of life synergy, all of her abilities just synergize with one another. She feels really good to play. The only downside is the horrible animation on her 4th ability. Stop letting animations shine, please, DE. A tier Warframe. NEKROS, the starter loot frame. The casual sit back, play how you want, and get some loot. Synergize with KHORA in a loot farm party. He can raise the dead to fight alongside him, pretty much if you want to cosplay as Sanjinu. Horrible 4th ability animation that leaves him vulnerable. He has AoE, no line of sight requirement, armor strip, decent crowd control, a solid frame that can be taken anywhere, B tier frame at base, A tier with helmet. Neja, another controversial frame, the infamous Kinetic Siphon Trap. He had his 15 minutes of fame with his 4th ability Augment alongside DAGATH's Helminth ability. That was a literal map-wide nuke, reaching 300 kills per minute, which ended up getting heavily nerfed. But he is a basic frame. He has some speed, status immunity, crowd control, debuff, and a little bit of teleportation. He is chillin' now. B tier frame. Nidus, another frame that has fallen from grace. Fundamentally a very synergistic kit, however, very outdated with the current game. He is too stationary if you want to play him optimally, and his playstyle and survivability are too outdated. C tier frame. Nova. She got an amazing rework that buffed a lot of her kits, but nerfed one of her abilities and synergies. She's still a solid choice for any content, good for farming teams, Netra cells, survival, you name it. Debuffing enemies to take more damage from all sources, speeding or slowing them down. She's also fast with her portals, and has good survivability with her first ability. A tier frame. Nyx, the Mind Beast. Recently buffed frame, has insane crowd control, decent survivability, a funny damage cap synergy. Her augments are still pretty mid. The only useful one in most cases is her first ability Augment, to increase the damage output on your mind controlled targets. All around decent frame, but not something that you necessarily pick up all the time. Her whole kit is about having other units do damage to themselves and aid her own damage. She's a utility frame that does decently well. B tier frame. Oberyn. So sad. Forgotten by DE, outdated, clunky, he has some crowd control, he needs to do extra steps just to simply armor strip, funny damage synergies with his first ability, but that's about it. He just doesn't fit or is noticeable in a team unless he uses a second ability with massive range. D tier frame at base, C tier with Helminth. Octavia, a strong frame that was power crept so hard. People are starting to forget her. To play her optimally, you require to camp and play stationary while teabagging to maintain buffs. She can be a decent weapon platformer, but outclassed by so many others. B tier frame. Protea. Great scaling damage, infinite energy and ammo that can be shared with allies, amazing shield regeneration, shield pool, and a shield gate duration increase that can also be shared with allies. Clunky 4th ability, but a very versatile frame that can fit anywhere. Great to have in your own team. A tier frame at base, S tier with Helminth. Corvex, prime example of clunk. He has high armor and is all about radiation damage. However, his kit lacks depth, sucks to play in a majority of the game, and a passive that doesn't even fit his design. D tier frame. Revenante, the Chad himself. All he is known for is surviving, and surviving really well. The actual unkillable Warframe. And how to play him? Shove a bunch of strength, a damage helmet, and just use him as a weapon platform that doesn't die. And that's all he cares about. He can also give some immortality to his teammates for a brief moment, without modding for range. He can mind control multiple targets to do his bidding, and use them as a battery, and easily one-shot enemies with 2 buttons. A tier frame at base, S tier with Helminth and Augment. Rhino. Funny how he comes right after Revenant, because they kind of have the same vibe, but Revenant does it better, and is way easier to use. However, Rhino uses the original Roar, so it's way more potent, making him a very solid weapon platform himself. Slap on Nourish, and now you can buff your allies with Roar and Nourish, while also being decently tanky, and you can get Rhino pretty early on, and great to have for new players. A tier frame. Siren. Okay, we already know where this is going. The best weapon platformer in the game and a solid ability DPS, decent crowd control, aggro manipulation, amazing scaling damage, partial armor strip, and amazing weapon buffing abilities that synergize with literally every single weapon in the game. Literally close your eyes, pick a weapon, put it on Siren, and you destroy. Yes, even the Stug. she fits in a lot of missions. Not only is her second ability an aggro manipulation tool, but a speed multiplier that helps you zoom across the map. An S tier frame, through and through. Sevagoth, a gloom bot, but now can nuke hordes of enemies with his augments. He still feels bare bones even with a stacked and bloated kit that leaves you confused and wondering on what he really wants to be. In terms of his prime design, he looks really damn cool. At this stage, you're pretty much playing Sevagoth as an alternative to other nuke warframes, or any warframe with melee influence. C tier frame at base, B tier with the augments, and helmet. Stynex suffers the same thing as GYRE, lackluster base kit and only feels really good to play when you slap on an augment and use a helmet. His first ability is his worst, and it's always something you're going to replace for Nourish, because Nourish buffs his third and fourth ability to spike his energy regen and increase damage. Slap on the Overguard augment and win the game, because you can also share this Overguard with allies. Playing Stynex without those two feels horrible. Literal night and day difference if you compare the two. D tier Warframe at base, B tier with the helmet and augment. Titania, outdated kit and only has one use, the meta frame for quick exterminate, capture, and rescue fishers. Oh yeah, she's also good in Void Flood. You slap on her Razorwing Blitz augment, zoom across the map, and pair that up with Thermal Sunder to nuke enemies as you're flying around. Otherwise, she just feels mediocre if you play her any other way, because other frames will just do it better. C tier. Trinity, aka Letty. She's always been a solid support, but now got an amazing quality of life upgrades. Unfortunately, this didn't bump her rank up, but she feels even better to play now. She has infinite energy for herself and allies, fully heal and gives damage reduction to her team and herself, status immunity, damage redirection, where she has enemies unalive themselves, and you pair that up with an augment so she can armor strip. Solid frame that fits in any situation. A tier frame. Valkyr, pretty much the same thing with Atlas, but with a lot more issues. And she has only one way of playing, press 4, spin to win, and is only saved by using Nourish to keep her fourth ability up active for a longer duration. She shines really well in solo scenarios as an exalted melee frame, but still outperformed by melee influence. And she does nothing else besides that. A D tier frame, even with helmet. Vauban, the Trainhead, another forgotten frame with a clunky kit that has already been power crept hard by a few frames, and one of them being CALIBAN. And that's just sad to see. His Flechette Orb still does a lot of damage, scales really well, but the problem is that it's too stationary. C tier frame. Volt, a solid weapon platformer with only 2 good abilities, and one of the other bad abilities is only useful with an augment. He moves fast, attacks fast, faster reloads, increases gun and certain projectiles critical damage with his shield, and he also gives all of his weapons electric damage thanks to his Shock Trooper augment and his shield, if you shoot through it. Insanely good with melee influence builds, some gun builds, the meta Profit Taker frame for speedrunning, still good in Eidolon hunts, aka dead content. He is an A tier frame, not any higher, even with helmet, because he has 2 dead abilities, and you would use the third one just to give electric damage on weapons. Varuna, the best melee warframe in the game. With one ability, you get crit chance, crit damage, flat increase to your status chance, guaranteed bleeds on your melee, sprint speed, and invisibility. Yes, that is just one ability, by the way. She has 4 unique passives, each corresponding with her abilities. Of course, the best one is giving you permanent status immunity that cannot be nullified. She can apply and spread insane amounts of status effects all at 10 stacks, greatly boosting her damage output, and KOUMEI exists. And she has no issues with energy or healing thanks to her third ability. She's fast, evasive, and nukes. S tier warframe. Wisp. Most people like her because she has the best bunda, aka Nyash. And yes, a lot of butt jokes. But she is an insanely solid frame with a lot of things going on in her kit. Speed, fire rate, attack speed, healing, crowd control, invisibility, invulnerability, teleportation, and damage spread. A frame that power crept Loki with just one ability. Another S tier warframe. Wukong. I feel sorry for Wukong players at this point, and the only time I would ever pick him up is if I'm doing a spy mission, because he is the best spy Warframe. Kinda sad what he's been reduced to. He's a decent frame, not bad for new players. He spawns a clone to play with himself, interpret that however you want. He has decent crowd control, iframes, overall a somewhat decent kit. But we have seen so much reduction in his power over the years. B tier frame. Zaku, amazing first ability for buffing weapon damage to then be useless when using his second ability. The third ability has 3 different abilities. Only one of them is useful. The fourth ability makes him into a box breaker for quick resource farming, but also stops the cooldowns of his other abilities and makes him more evasive. If you want him to make sense, he needs a helmet, because with his base kit, he's all over the place. So either replaces 1 with Roar or Nourish, or replaces 4 so he can run Nourish with Zata for a weapon platform build, replaces 3 with Terrify to run and gun. A tier frame at base, S tier with the proper helmets and synergy. Yareli used to be the worst Warframe in the game, but KOUMEI was released. Her entire kit is a contradiction. She can't use helmet abilities while on her board, limited to your secondary, your movement is limited and clunky, a Prowl IVARA would get to the objective faster than Yareli on her board, and DE released an augment so you don't have to be on your board instead of reworking the whole K-Drive gimmick. Her best ability is just a generic grouping tool. Her third ability exists to exists. I have no idea why it's even there. It requires you to be close to enemies to deal damage, but her other 2 abilities push enemies away from you. Make it make sense, DE. T for trash. Zephyr, the underrated queen of nukes and buggy interactions, because DE coding has no idea how to math. The amount of bugs surrounding her 4th ability are too damn high. And still not fixed, and I don't think DE even knows how it's working at this point. Decent survivability, somewhat okay weapon platformer, also another frame with interesting movement tools. A tier frame. So folks, this is 2025's Warframe ranking. The format was definitely different this year, and definitely shorter. A lot of frames have seen a significant buff. Quite a few have not been reworked, left in the gutter to rot. Hopefully they get touched with no consent, so they can be more useful. But besides the frames needing a rework, it's the game that's also evolving, and those old Warframes are being left behind. Either they rework the frames or rework the game and get a whole new balance scheme. And let's be honest, there is no easy way for them to do this, and the only way is to just start doing it. Otherwise, this is what's to be expected. Again, don't use tier lists as validation. And if you get your feelings hurt over a video game tier list ranking, then you need serious mental help. Anyway, folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do it for the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace, happy holidays.